Welcome to More Than Words, a podcast about treating the whole child brought to you by the Reading and Language Learning Center. I'm your host, Tristan, and today I'm joined by speech language pathologist Carleton Levert to discuss AAC evaluations. Hi, Carleton. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good today. How are you today, Tristan?
I'm awesome. We're excited for you to be here. We've had a few episodes on AAC before, but never about evaluations. So I think this will be very interesting for folks to hear.
Yeah, I'm happy to join the number and add to the wealth of knowledge that our profession can offer.
Awesome. Well, let's start with an introduction. Can you tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Oh yeah, sure. My name is Carleton Levert, like you just so eloquently pronounced and introduced me. I am a speech language pathologist, kind of a new young one. I've been in the field for like 12 years. I have a private practice here in Washington, D.C.
Awesome.
I love speech. I love speech. I love speech. I work across the lifespan. And I work in primarily school-based as a private practitioner, but also community-based setting as a private practitioner.
Oh, that's very cool. When you say community-based, what do you mean? Because I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say that.
Yeah, I don't see people talk about community-based, but when I got out there and started working, I felt like that's what I was doing. Like I was in the community. I would meet folks at a Barnes and Nobles, a Starbucks, a restaurant, a park, things that fit into that person's daily life, and they're leveraging the community for their communication needs because these are a lot of adults that I was
Yeah.
working with. And like, they didn't fit into the school model. They didn't fit into the medical model. I'm like, well, what else is there? And I'm like, it's community based. And,
Wow.
that's just what I say now.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. So you said you own your own private practice. So if people were looking to find you, your services, all of that, where would they go? And you're DC based. So where physically and online would they go?
Sweet. Physically, I have an office at a middle school, Capitol Village Public Charter School in the Brentwood neighborhood of Washington, D.C., Northeast Quadrant. I do a lot of my in-person there, and of course, I'm all over the D.C. community, so you might see me, maybe, I don't know, if you're in my neighborhoods. Digitally, you can find me at weaskspeech.com. It's my website. You'll see my face. And you can also find me on socials. But my primary social is Instagram. It's we_ask_speech.
All right. Well, then I will link all those things in the show notes so people can find you.
Sweet.
Yeah. Well, let's hop into these questions. Can you start by walking us through like what typically happens during an AAC evaluation, starting from like the first conversation and then taking it all the way through to, any recommendations that you end up making?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to try my best to give the Cliff Notes version, but I might get excited. Quick disclaimer for your audience. Okay, so walking through the AAC evaluation, school-based evaluations, right? So we're starting with schools because on this podcast, we talk a lot about how to treat the child. So I want to start
Yeah.
there. So school-based evaluations always start with a request from the LEA, the local education agent. And at least the case review, then interviews, evaluation, building, and administration. And of course, you have your observation and your write-up. If I had to sum it up, is that straightforward. But it can be a little nuanced because you have to choose specific evaluations for your evaluation battery for these AACs. And I want to be clear about something too, that there's also AT, assistive technology. And in that, the broader idea about these technologies, we're talking about positioning and mounting on wheelchairs or bedsides, things like that. That's not really in our wheelhouse. And I'll probably say that again during this interview, but that's not in our wheelhouse as speech therapists. That's more so for the OTs and PTs. So, we don't do that. But we do this. We do device trials, which are really exciting. We get to present all these different devices to an individual and see what works best and what can they handle and what their potential is. How we set our goals, we approach that differently because we're not just thinking about communication. We're also thinking about function of the device and the well-being of the individual with using it. So I think that's, the general kind of overview of the approach.
Yeah. Well, that's always interesting. You said you don't work with like mounting the device and all of those things, but you do device trials.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I think I might hear the like, how does that work? It's funny. I had a student that I did an evaluation for at a charter school, because there are plenty of charter schools out here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
This young student had a wheelchair, but it was challenging to find a place to mount that device. And
Sure.
so I had to consult my OT friends because I'm like, hey, I don't know what to do. Like,
Yeah.
can you help me out here? Can you figure it out? And so we unraveled that. The student needs to receive a wheelchair. It was a bit of a complicated case, actually,
Sure.
because the student needs a new wheelchair because the previous one was no longer operational, and the school
Oh my
was like,
gosh.
okay, this is getting a little it's getting a little messy. Like I'm just here to do the
Yeah.
evaluation. So yeah, things can get a little tricky there, but it's important to remember what we do. So
Yeah.
we're talking about that and still finding ways to make sure that the student can access the device. If it's not mounted on that wheelchair, then there's a one-to-one, which was on the child's IEP, and there was that support to carry that device throughout the day. And so that's a
Yeah.
part of like the goal too, when we think about operation and management of the device. Like, how is it going to get around? Who's going to keep an eye on it? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of that gray area, I think,
Yeah.
for us as speech therapists.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned it because, like, you always think it takes a village. You always hear that phrase. And I feel like that is kind of a, like, part of that in essence of, like, you wouldn't realize as a parent necessarily that an OT would be, like, a really good person to help someone, like, help your child understand where this is, like, in space and figure out how to best access it physically, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, you people really don't. And I didn't initially either because I'm not one who is challenged with mobility needs.
Right.
My mobility is pretty typical, if you will. So I don't really have that perspective. I was
Yeah.
reading this book called Inside My Outside. And it's written by this woman. I'm so sorry, I can't remember her name, but maybe it'll come back to
Oh,
me
it's okay.
later.
Yeah.
But it's written by this woman who is diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and she's an author. She
Yeah.
wrote this book and she wrote something else, but she was giving a self-narration of what it's like to be someone who was locked in and like to have her
Mm,
device mounted and to wait for someone to make sure that she can access the device and how she tries to navigate all these different communication and mobility challenges. I mean, and she does them
yeah.
with support. So they kind of gave me perspective of like, okay. Now I think I might see
Wow.
like what this need is, and I know not how to support that. So I'm gonna just ask somebody
Right.
else. I'm gonna ask my OT
Exactly.
people. Yeah, I read the book. I have to yield. So
Yeah. Wow, that's very cool. So sorry, I took us on a tangent, but so once you've started that evaluation, like you kind of mentioned like the battery of tests that you would use for the evaluation. So what are the areas that you look at during an AAC evaluation that are kind of beyond general speech? So things like language skills, like motor access, maybe sensory needs, and the environment that a child maybe communicates in.
So a couple clinical areas that might not surprise us are vision, hearing, gross and fine motor movements, right? These are things that we think about for the device, how the child can access the device, hear it, see it, those sensory needs. But we do have to go a little bit beyond. And before I do that, because I mentioned OT and
Yeah.
mounting and positioning of the device. So I just want to shout out all of my OT friends. OTs are amazing. OTs are fire. We love OTs here at Speech,
Yes.
because they help us so much. So like those are some of the clinical areas, and clinical is pretty standardized, so it's not going to bend too much. When
Okay.
we talk about some social environmental areas to consider, we get into more of the case review, and I think that's where we start to examine some other areas. How I phrase it is, or how I approach it is, I have to use the individual circle of support, and
Mm,
it's this idea that I got from some social work friends. But basically it's kind of like think like a bullseye, right? And so in the center of the bullseye, you have the individual you're serving. And immediately next to that, you have like their immediate family. And then next to
right.
that, you have like maybe their community, extended family, maybe. And then outside of that, you have the bigger like neighborhood, maybe their faith community, maybe their work community. It's an adult. So, and then, this kind of branches out
Yeah.
from there, kind of ripples out from there. So my approach is a little different in that because when I was learning to do evaluations, speech and language evaluations as an SLP, we weren't really approaching it like that. We like talk to the kid, talk to the family, talk to the teachers, write it. And I think this
Yeah.
one you have to go a little bit further because you really want to know how the individual is going to use that device throughout the day. Not just for your own sake, but because sometimes insurance wants to know. They want to
Yeah.
know these things too. So you have to really explain that.
That is very
Yeah.
interesting. And it's funny that you said areas that may not surprise you, one of them being vision. But funny enough, I was surprised by vision.
You were surprised by vision?
I don't know why, but it didn't like when you think about AAC and you think about speech, you don't necessarily think about vision as a
Yeah, you
person that's
don't.
not a speech person.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. Well, then that might surprise some people. And so with vision, what are we looking at with vision? Like hand-eye coordination,
Mm,
visual acuity. I think that's how my visual motor folks
yeah,
describe that.
right.
So you do want to take note of these things, and we are putting it into the evaluation, but we're not doing the depth of evaluation that those other providers are doing. We are
Sure.
observing, right? So we might
Right.
collect some data through an interview with the visual, with the vision therapist, or we might collect some information with the OT or the PT. But it's really observation and interview, because that's not our area of practice. That's not our scope of practice.
Yeah. But it's interesting to hear that like that is something that you guys do observe and take into consideration because I mean, sometimes I think parents, since they don't know what is happening, right? Like they don't know what to expect. Sometimes I feel like they think, oh, you didn't look at the whole picture, or you may not have seen this or that. So I think it's good to mention things like that because you do observe, a person, a child, and all of that in every facet, in every way. And if you need more information, you'll like go dig for that in wherever you have to.
Yeah, I think you just need something to launch off of. And, I hope that helps people because it is a bit of a maze, but I think once you know your way
Yeah.
with evaluation preparation.
So, what is some of the most important information that parents or maybe caregivers can provide to you before an evaluation that really guides like good decision making and long-term success?
Oh, love this question. And I would definitely say my number one, in my experience, as me, Carleton Levert, is previous history with technology. If
Mm.
the parent can tell me, yes, my child has had an AAC device, we've had a Big Mac button, we've had a switch, we've had a Go Talk, we've had, exchange picture cards because Pex is a brand, so like that's trademark. And people say that, and I try to
Oh,
correct people like, you gotta be careful because you might get into something. But
yeah.
these pictures that you exchange as a part of your communication
Yeah.
systematically, that is helpful to know because that also informs the device trial, right? If
Mm.
I know that, I'm going to say Abby, because I don't know, this name Abby just popped into my head. If I
Sure.
say Abby is already using a high-tech communication device, then and she's doing well with it, we just need to update it maybe because she's had it maybe since first grade and now she's in middle school, entering middle school, and the family wants to update it. And there are some policies, I'm getting a little tangent, but there are some policies out there, especially in DC Medicaid, that grants a certain amount of money, $10,000 over the course of 5 years, right,
Okay.
for Medicaid. So every 5 years, you are able to spend up to $10,000 on that device. And it's nice that the
Wow.
cost has gone down a lot of these, so you might not hit
Yeah.
that, but some of these are still pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So anyways, and just knowing that history with technology is really helpful because it can
Yeah.
inform, well, is it appropriate to request a device now? Is your insurance maybe not really wanting to pay? Because that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Do we know that the child might throw the device? Because I've been hitting the
Mm.
head with some of these devices.
Oh
And
no.
yeah, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And I don't, yeah, even if you pad these tablets with those nice silicone cases, they still
Yes.
hurt.
Oh, I'm sure.
Will hurt.
Yes.
So you want to know this because we don't want is for the device to be damaged and for it to become a liability and for someone else to get hurt. It's supposed
Right.
to aid communication, not be used as a frisbee. So,
Right. Yeah. Well,
but
that's
yeah, that's
all good information there. Um, so how we kind of talked about this before, right? Like you mentioned the bullseye of communication like differences and needs in a way. So how do you approach an AAC evaluation when a child's communication like their needs change across different settings, or like maybe different day to day rather than being like a very consistent routine of their communication needs?
hmm I would say when it comes to the individual and their communication needs, it's best to start in a location where they are consistent with their communication skills, and of course with people that they are comfortable with.
Right.
Thinking again from the perspective of a school-based evaluator, that might be the child's one-to-one. Sometimes a friend, but we try to leave the friends out. They're helpful during the intervention process, but not so much the evaluation process, in my opinion.
Sure.
The family members, if the family can be available for it, anything that's going to help that individual, that child, to kind of like, okay, like I'm calm here, I can express myself freely. Because you do get into code switching. A lot of the work that I do, being here in DC, aka Chocolate City, as it's also known, a lot of the work I do is with families that are Black or African American.
Yeah.
I do work with families outside of the African American diaspora. But you kind of see this challenge for some of the language and some of the
Sure.
communication demands.
Yeah.
And that I'm going to chalk it up to code switching today. You have to know if the student is going to code switch and if they're a code
Yeah.
switcher, and you can kind of understand that better when you know the child better. Because that might change their communication needs. Now,
Yeah.
in another context, talking about behavior, sure, a kid might have an up day, they might have a down day. Maybe today's Tuesday, maybe today is Taco Tuesday,
Right.
and they're really looking forward to it. So on their best behavior. Or maybe
Yeah.
today is a Monday and they don't like Mondays, so it's
Yeah.
not gonna go. So, I try to encourage other SOPs and my own practice to try to do 2 to 3 days of testing. It's
Mhm.
not always possible, but if you can, just to try to make sure you're getting that consistency with communication.
Yeah.
Especially for myself, because I go to schools that I'm not a part of and do evaluations, right? I'm an outside evaluator. So there's always
Yeah.
that rapport building that I have to do like right away. And that
Yeah.
can take some time. And so I try to leverage the rapport that the communication partner has. But
Yeah.
even still, I got to come back the next day and like, hey, you remember me? Okay, great. Can we talk? Can we do
Right.
this? Are you ready for me? All right, come on, let's do this.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned like doing testing over a couple days, because we were just talking to another lovely human, Megan Davis, about doing psychoeducational evaluations. And she was like, we try to do testing over a couple days so that we can, like, for a number of reasons, but because testing is so long, and also you get to see the kid over more than one day. And sometimes I talk to the SLPs here and they'll say, like, oh, yeah, if you do an evaluation on just the one day, not that this is terrible, but you kind of get the kid like a snapshot of them at one period of time and maybe having a bad day. So when you get the opportunity to kind of like do, like you said, a few days of testing, it opens that up to see like, oh, maybe yesterday you were having a tough day, and we'll take that into consideration.
Yeah, totally. Or, it's also been the case for me the day I show up for the evaluation, the one-to-one isn't there. And now the
Oh,
classroom teachers are like, oh, well, their one-to-one isn't here. So, and I have the classroom, so I have to stay here. And you just have to take them and do the evaluation. I'm like, oh my God, like I
oh
don't have
no.
any social points with this individual, with this child.
Yeah.
So, we make it through. We always make it
Yeah.
through. I can say that.
Yeah. And can you define one to one for people who might not know what that means?
Yeah, a one-to-one is a designation on a child's IEP. There is an adult version of this too, but I'm going to stick with the child.
Sure.
It allows that child to have an adult in the classroom and throughout the school day to be with them one-on-one.
Yeah.
That person takes care of their maybe transition needs, emotional support, communication supports. It really depends on the need of the child, but I've seen it for all levels. Some of my students even have it just to help them stay organized and focused on their schedule. Because some kids are like wandering around the hallway in middle school.
Right.
It's like, where's your class? Like, I don't know. It's like,
I
okay,
don't
where's your
know.
one-to-one?
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for
Yeah.
explaining that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so what are maybe some red flags that like an AAC system is not really supporting communication, even if a child like technically they have access to one? What are some signs that you're seeing that like that's not really for them.
Yeah, my red flags are poor operation of the device. And I think I mentioned that earlier in our chat today that one of the goals should be how to operate the device, how to turn it on,
Yeah.
how to turn up the volume, how to turn down the volume.
Yeah.
Some students I've met are really good at programming their device. So can they do
Mm,
that? Can they at least go to like buttons for their basic needs? And we
right.
think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one way to think about that. So can they talk about food? Can they talk about water, safety, shelter, their state
Right.
of being, right? So poor operation of the device. Another one that I would say is assuming assistance is needed to operate or prime the device use. So in another way to say like, if there are less than two individuals that are part of the school's AAC support team, if you will, then that's a red flag because the
Oh, geez. Yeah.
SOP presumably is going to be that go-to person. Although there's some SOPs out there that don't feel so confident using AAC devices. And
Sure.
there's a lot of research out there. It's getting better by the decade, but by and large, SOPs really don't feel prepared to treat the child in the school building with AAC. There's some
Yeah.
trepidation, at least in the research that I've looked at. So back to what I was saying here too, like if the SOP is charged with being that one person to go to for the device. There needs to be another person like the teacher or the one-to-one that is, in charge of, like I said, operating and priming the device use. So when I get to a space and I see that no one is taking on that role and the SOP is kind of uneasy about it, I'm like, all right, that's a
Right.
red flag that this AAC is probably not getting used because the
Yeah.
kid probably needs help and the adults don't feel comfortable helping. And I get that. I totally get that.
Yeah.
I say another red flag for me is the no documented use of the device for caregiver
Mm.
interviews. And what I mean by that is if I go to the teacher or the parent or the one-to-one, I was like, well, yeah, how is Abby? I mean, Abby is my fictional person today.
Love it.
I'm going to change the name. How is Robert? How is Robert doing with the device? And everyone's like, I think Robert brought the device today. Or, yeah, I haven't seen Robert's device. And now I'm looking like, all right, where's Robert's device? And so that's
Oh
my red
gosh.
flag too, because it means the device is probably under a desk, in the backpack, in a locker, at home, uncharged. And that's just the culture around it. But
Yeah.
speaking of chargers, the charger is a red flag too. Sometimes families will say, well, we can't find the charger or it won't charge. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you just got it. I don't
Oh
understand.
gosh.
So that can be a red flag too, because it means that the care of the device is not being maintained. If I
Yeah.
had to say one more, I might say if the device is being used in the community and there's no personalization, right? Because
Yeah.
I think we're in the school building. Things are kind of fixed. There's some nuance of personalization that can happen there, but
Yeah.
especially when we're in the community. I mean, I've worked with folks who love McDonald's, who love Chipotle, and those aren't words that are traditionally programmed on these devices, these high-tech devices, and the
Right.
low-tech too. You have to find those pictures and you have to program it. So if I don't see personalization of the individual's name or their family member's name, like mom or dad or the family dog, locations that they like, preferred objects, even skin tone changes can kind of be a red
Yeah.
flag because, I think a lot of us know that like we practice the idea like representation matters. So as
Yeah.
people want to see images that match that person's identity and what they perceive as their identity. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
those voice profiles are part of that too. It's
Right.
kind of funny because I've worked with an adult female and we were programming the voice on her device to personalize it. And we're going through the voices. I'm like, do you like this voice? I feel like an optometrist, like better one, better two. Do you like this
Right.
voice? Do you like that voice? And she liked the male voices. And I was
Wow.
like, are you sure? And she was nonverbal. So she
Okay.
made it clear to me that she did like the male voice. I'm like, okay, if you like it, it's saved.
Great.
Like, that's what
Yeah.
you want. So, but that's personalization. That shows me
Absolutely.
that there is some investment, it's personalized. So that person feels like, yeah, this is my device.
Yeah.
You can also learn a little tip I've learned from some of my OT friends, writing the child's name on the device, finding a way to
Yeah.
label that and letting them be a part of that so they can know like, this is mine, or putting stickers on the device, something that makes it
Yeah.
like, yeah, Bluey's all over my tablet. This is my Bluey tablet, and I use this for
Yeah.
communication. Trying to create that investment, that buy-in. But if I don't see those things, yeah, it's red flag city all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we we had Madison Brumbaugh on the podcast as well, and we kind of talked about the personalization of devices and having kids be a part of the process. And so I'm glad you brought that up too, because it's just, I agree in that it's such a big piece of making that person's voice heard. And I said this when we were talking to her too, like, so this is someone's way of communicating, right? Like this is essentially their voice. And so when you don't
Hmm.
personalize it, you're like, you could be talking to anyone, or like it's like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a very common word and I can't think of, oh, it's like censorship, right? It's like censoring
Mm,
that person through, the way that you're kind of like forcing them to communicate. So I appreciate you saying that.
yes, yes. You know, and I know I listened to that interview with Madison, and she
Yeah.
said something that I really, really loved. And she said that she has to shock folks into using the device sometimes
Yes.
to kind of understand what that need is. And she
Yeah.
said, like, yeah, if you take away the individual device, it's like you're ripping out that person's vocal cords.
Yeah.
And I was like, she's like, but I have to get that graphic. And I was like, yeah, no, I totally agree because creating buy-in. I know this is not quite what you asked me, but like creating buy-in for everyone in that circle of support to use the device is so key. And
Yeah.
sometimes folks don't get it. I mean, I've had a student who had a device, very limited verbal, and this student, we're going to call her April. I'm going to change up my names.
Great.
April loved to press the button help and eat. And like, I mean, like perseverative, like over and
Yeah.
over. It drove the classroom mad, students included. And the teacher started to turn the device all the way down or just hide it.
Oh
And I was like, you can't
no.
do that. Like, like, yes, it's annoying, but like she wants to communicate. So acknowledge her, give her that cue. And so we did some trainings. I had to coordinate some staff PDs around it to
Yeah.
help. And I did see the culture around that device change, but they saw it as a nuisance. And they would take that child's voice away through
Oh
that
my
device.
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say just that. I would hold my head. I'm like, all right, it's cool. This is the work.
Oh,
Like, it's okay. We're gonna train everybody. And we did get to
yes.
see some progress with that.
Yeah.
So I'm glad, but it takes that training, it takes that
Yeah.
time. And making those PDs a part of the school's PDs, speaking
Yeah.
to the director of the school, the principal, saying, hey, we need to do a PD around this topic of AAC. So key because otherwise that device would be in the backpack all the time. And I'd be like,
Oh
this
yeah.
is terrible. This is a crime.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I've heard other SLPs at RLC say like, "Oh, yep, we asked about a device, like how's Jimmy using his device?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know." And it's like a doorstop. Like it's just sitting somewhere like never being used and is dead and whatever. So,
Always.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you see the same message that was on there from like when you left school on Friday and you come back on Monday and the same message is there. It's like, wait a second. You didn't use the
Mm,
device at all over the weekend? Okay.
right.
All right.
You're
Cool,
like,
cool,
"Oh
cool,
dear."
cool.
Right.
Yeah. All right. We got more work to do. That's all that means.
Exactly. Yes. So back to the evaluations in general, how should evaluations and intervention as well evolve over time as the child grows, as they develop new skills and, they go into new and different environments, maybe they're doing new activities, whatever that might be.
I would say a big picture idea is evaluation and intervention should be as dynamic as the individual.
Mm,
Right. So, especially intervention. I mean, you're writing, well, you're creating therapy for this individual based on their shifting needs. Maybe they liked Blue yesterday and now they like, I don't know, what do kids like these days? Minecraft, or
fair.
Roblox.
Yeah.
And so now you got to pivot and intervention now has to have Roblox. You got to program all this new language like mines and zombies and I don't know.
I don't
Um,
know either.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's not my, I'm a gamer, but not that kind of gamer. But anyways,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's really the big picture ideas that evaluation
Right.
and intervention have to be as dynamic as the individual you're assessing. Because when the individual's needs and communication skills shift, presumably the communication modalities and the evaluation protocol should shift too.
Right.
So to take it a little further for evaluation, it should be flexible as far as the device trials. I know I had mentioned it earlier, but when you do that case review data and you find out that Abby, April, or Robert have had a device in the past or have not, then you're able to, tweak your evaluation
Right.
parameters. Yeah, I would say like big ideas. That's it. Because a lot of the testing that we do for these AAC evaluations, we still look at language. We might look at fluency if the individual is a verbal communicator. We will definitely look at vocabulary to
Yeah.
see what the vocabulary profile is of that individual. So those things are standardized. Those tend to come with standardized measures. So it's really fixed. There's not a lot of room for adjustment, even if the child matriculates through school and ages over lifetime.
Right.
So that's kind of set. I think the dynamic part is really the intervention. If I could say there is a dynamic part to the evaluation that's truly, truly dynamic to me, it's the goal setting. I
Hmm.
mean, that is a big part in your recommendations, right? So you want to create a goal that really speaks to that child. And I'm going to keep going over this because I think it's something that SLPs miss. It's definitely something I missed before I had to do more research on it. But evaluation should include operation of that device. Is
Right.
the child carrying that device throughout the school day? Are they able to? Can they turn it on? Can they use it to repeat themselves? Can they use it to get someone's attention? Can they
Right.
participate in a turn-taking conversation? Like those are some social skills too I threw in there, but all of those goals are things that people should be thinking about. And that's a dynamic part of evaluation for me.
Yeah. So can you maybe touch on some myths, like some persistent myths about AAC that you see affecting when or maybe even how children gain access to their support?
Certainly, I would say the most persistent myths about AAC that I have found funding, the question of who's paying for that. Because at the end of the day, the bottom dollar is the bottom line. It's a thing that I say, and I think it's so true because these devices need to be funded. They don't fall
Yeah.
out of the sky. Some
Right.
people are blessed to have devices gifted to them, and then they can be modified. Some families have the blessing of money to purchase apps or to purchase hardware to do this, but a lot of times folks are looking for the school to pay for it, and the school is
Right.
hoping that insurance will pay for it, and the insurance sometimes will prefer if the individual or the school pay for it. So that
Right.
is always that question: who's paying for this?
Yeah.
So that's a big challenge because no one's really sure. The myth is like the school should pay for it,
Right.
according to IDEA, that is what it states, but there are ways that schools can mitigate that cost. And so it's a myth that I have to pay for it. And it's interesting. That's a whole nother topic there, I think.
Yeah.
Um, my next myth is access to skills and knowledge building. Someone has to train me, right? That's what they say, that access to skills and knowledge building. Some of the research I've done, well, that I've read, let me say not done, but have read, talks about, SLPs find it very hard to find that time to train for intervention and to train to do these evaluations.
Right.
And so there's a skills and knowledge gap. Like, yes, you learn something about AAC up to a certain point. And especially in this day in 2026, a good amount of graduate programs are having an AAC class, having multiple AAC classes
Right.
even. So the exposure is there, but the opportunity to build your skill set beyond graduate school is challenging for SLPs. I mean, you're throwing yourself back into life. You have a full caseload. You might have some personal things going on too. So I get that, but it's a myth because you can train yourself.
Yeah.
A lot of these agencies, some of these big name, big brand agencies, they offer training modules. And, in Asher, we're required to get 3.0 CEU hours, which really translates like 30 hours of continuing education.
Right.
The profession already requires us to pursue more knowledge to maintain our
Right.
licensure. So that's why it's a myth to me. It's like, this is already built in. At this point, you just
Yeah.
got to find a place to do it. But like, you have to get these CEUs.
Right.
So, I think that's a myth. Uh, Perceived capacity of the child. I was listening to RLC's podcast in preparation for this, and I heard Dr. Kristen Davies say something that like I just had to like do like a poetry snap too. I was like, yeah,
Oh
that's
yeah.
that's that. That's it right there. Dr. Christy Davies said presume competence.
Yeah.
Presume competence. This is two words,
Yep.
but it's so profound.
Yep.
Because a lot of times people think that the individual won't benefit from the device at all. I'm going to come up with a new name, and this name is Larry. Larry does
Larry.
not. Larry does not have the device so that he can go to the mall and order a movie and popcorn and all that. That would be nice. But he has it just so he can request water at home. But some
Sure.
folks are at home and like, yeah, like He doesn't need that. Like we just give that to him, but we kind of know when
Oh
that
gosh.
need is there. And I'm just kind of like, well, that's great, but like, wouldn't that be nice for like this person to communicate on their own? Like, how good does it
Right.
feel for you to express your wants and needs? And how bad does it feel for you when you're about to say something, somebody jumps in and like steals your thunder? You know,
Exactly.
and I think we have those people in our lives. So like every time I open my mouth to speak, you open your
Yeah.
mouth. And
Yeah.
you're speaking over me. You're saying what I gotta say. So it's just like, okay, yeah, yeah. When I frame it like that, sometimes people are like, yeah, I guess they might want an opportunity to say what they want to say, even if I know what they're going to say. I'm like, yes,
Right.
because people's voices matter. And so
Yep.
I think the myth is like there's nothing for that individual to communicate, and that's just not the case. Like you have to presume competence.
Absolutely.
If I could give one more myth,
Yeah.
I would say AAC is too complicated. There are some folks who believe that AAC is too complicated to use, and they think we don't need it. I've met folks who decided that, instead of using AAC to communicate, we're going to stick with sign language.
Oh,
And like, I love American Sign Language. I love languages, so I think
right.
that's pretty cool. But how many people do you know in this individual's life that can reliably use American Sign Language?
Right.
I mean, sure, we can train them, but we can also train them to use a device. The device speaks English, spoken English. The device
Right.
has text in spoken English, and it comes with pictures.
Yeah.
American Sign Language is an abstract language. It is a full, robust language. There
Right.
are some nuances about it. There are some things that you might not think mean what they mean. So it's that same thing. I'm trying to get people to understand how language might challenge this person's ability to communicate if they don't have something that everyone in the circle of support can connect to and understand.
Right.
Because communication is a two-way street. So if I'm signing bathroom to you and you think that I'm like giving the black power fist, I'm like, oh goodness, no, I got to go to the bathroom, and I really wish you would take me.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
like, and my folks who know ASL, they might laugh at that, but I don't know how to describe that. It's really like trying to break that myth, bust that myth for folks that
Yeah.
like you I won't say you need AAC, but you need to find a way to communicate that everybody can use equally. And
Yeah.
so the myth there is like we don't need it. I'm like, yeah, okay, sure.
You're like, nah, I don't know about that.
Okay,
Gonna go with
okay.
the
If you don't want
we're
it,
having a
someone
hard
else
time
does.
communicating here.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
might
yeah.
need to
We're having
reevaluate,
a little communication breakdown.
right? So what's your like top myth that you wish families and educators could let go of?
My number one myth, my bonus myth is I've took a note on this. I'm going to read this.
Yeah.
SOPs know nothing about mounting and positioning. And so I'm kind of coming back to where I was at the beginning because, like I said before, it's not something, at least in my graduate program, that we were trained on. And I
Sure.
also supervise graduate students from different universities in the area and a little outside of the DMV too. And no one's talking about mounting and positioning.
Yeah.
And so, I was like, yeah, like, no, I don't know that. I don't know anything about that. But it's like, you don't. And I get that because you weren't trained. But intuitively, you can look at a child's wheelchair and say, well, where are they going to put the device? And
Right.
now you have to figure out where to put that, right? You can kind of answer those questions. And you still typically, you have access to other professionals, PTs, OTs, who can help you to answer those questions. And I would take it a step further and say that there are community-based resources, right? I said I like to practice community-based speech therapy because the community has so many answers, especially a city that's as big and as rich as DC. There might
Right.
be some cities, some towns that might not have all the resources, but DC is nice in that it's a capital city.
Yeah.
It's a small city, in the biggest surrounding area. So we have a resource right here in the city that's super accessible. It's right off the metro, even. The DC Assistive Technology Program.
Mm.
It's a grant-funded organization. It's funded at the federal level, and there is one in every state. They are
Wow.
typically in the capital of the state,
Sure.
but there's one in every state.
Right.
That organization in that state is specifically responsible for, bridging that gap for access for AT and AAC, not just for families and individuals, but also for uh, related service providers.
Oh,
So,
wow.
as a service provider, you can always go there and ask about mounting and positioning, or you can ask about new or old assistive technologies that you could trial or even gain some perspective. And I think having that community-based resource is so key that when you know you have that, you really don't have the excuse of like SLPs know nothing about mounting and positioning. It's like,
Right.
you're not using your resources. You got to tap
Yeah.
in. Had the kids say today, you got to lock in. You got to lock in.
Exactly, right?
Okay, so yeah, that's my bonus myth there.
Yeah, I love it. Well, this has been fabulous. I mean, we've learned a lot about evaluations. We've learned even more about intervention and myths, and I just appreciate you being here and sharing all of this with us. Is there any like last minute thing you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, if I could say one more thing, thank you so much for having me,
Of
first and
course.
foremost. And I really encourage SOPs who hear this and graduate students who hear this to be encouraged. Your courage to try out AAC is making a difference. And I don't say that because of what I see, but because of what I read in the research. Like I said, like every couple of decades, someone jumps out there and does a survey of SOPs in a school-based or medical-based, what have you, that feel comfortable in their areas of competency with AAC. And the data is getting better.
Yeah.
So, stay encouraged and change that data. We can do this.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you again for being here, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the audience for listening. Make sure to subscribe and leave us a little rating and review. It helps other folks find the podcast, and we'll chat with you next time.